A soul was not made to be torn. It is the essence of a being, the tapestry of life woven with threads of love, pain, joy, and memory. But what if someone, in their arrogance and fear, decided to desecrate this tapestry? What if, to cheat death, a wizard dared not just to tear his soul once, but 7 times?
This is not a story of heroes.
It is a dive into the abyss. The secret history of how Tom Riddle became Lord Voldemort. Help me reach my goal of 1,000 subscribers. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss any magical adventures. And in the comments, tell me, what cities are you watching from? Chapter 1. The shadow of a name. The London of the 1930s was a labyrinth of soot and fog, a world of grey stone and indifferent skies. At the heart of this labyrinth, Wool's Orphanage stood not as a refuge, but as a fortress of forgetfulness. Its dirty brick walls sweated the dampness of the Thames, and its windows, like empty eyes, stared out at a world that preferred not to look back. Within these walls, time moved differently, dragging on in a cycle of meager meals, thin sheets, and a loneliness as palpable as the cold that seeped through the cracks. In this kingdom of abandonment lived a boy who was an island unto himself.
Tom Marvolo Riddle.
He did not cry like the other children, nor did he seek the comfort of a touch or a kind word. His dark eyes, of a disconcerting intensity, observed everything with a predatory calm. There was a stillness about him, a self-sufficiency that did not belong to a child. The other children feared him. Their toys disappeared, their pets fell ill, and whispers of strange, inexplicable events followed him like a shadow. A rabbit hanging from the rafters, a box of stolen treasures that mysteriously appeared under his mattress. Tom did not see himself as cruel. He saw himself as just. The world had denied him everything. He was only taking what he felt was rightfully his. He knew, with a certainty that burned in his chest, that he was different. Not just special, but superior. The word mother was a hollow sound, the story of a weak woman who had died, abandoning him on the steps of that place. The name father was a poison, a muggle who had rejected him. He did not belong to that world of weakness and filth. Power tingled in his veins, an electricity he had learned to control. He could move things without touching them. He could make people feel pain with a single glance. And, most importantly, he could talk to snakes. They understood him, hissing secrets in the forgotten garden of the orphanage, recognizing him as one of their own. They were the only creatures that did not look at him with fear, but with an ancient deference. The monotony of his existence was broken on a particularly stuffy summer day. The air was heavy and still when a tall man, with auburn hair and beard and a peculiar twinkle in his blue eyes, passed through the gates of Wool's Orphanage. His name was Albus Dumbledore. He did not wear the drab, practical clothes of Muggle London, but an eccentric plum-colored velvet suit that seemed to absorb the grey light of the environment. The meeting between the two was a clash of realities. In Tom's small room, Dumbledore did not find a frightened child, but a young king in his castle of solitude. He spoke of magic, of a hidden world where Tom's power was not an aberration, but a gift. He spoke of a school called Hogwarts. For any other child, it would have been a dream. For Tom, it was a confirmation. The proof that his intuition, his belief in his own uniqueness, was the truth. He was not crazy. He was magical. Dumbledore's demonstration, setting Tom's wardrobe on fire with a wave of his wand to reveal the stolen items, did not frighten him. On the contrary, it fascinated him. It was not the magic that impressed him, but the control. That man possessed a power that Tom had only begun to explore. A power he coveted. That day, as Dumbledore walked away, leaving behind the acceptance letter and a promise of a new beginning, Tom Riddle did not feel gratitude. He felt a purpose. Hogwarts would not be a home, as Dumbledore had suggested. It would be an arsenal.
A library of secrets.
A training ground for the greatness he knew awaited him. As he packed his small suitcase, leaving the grey world of Wool's Orphanage behind, he made a silent promise to himself. He would never be powerless again. He would never be ordinary again. He would become so powerful that no one would ever dare to abandon him again. He would make the wizarding world bow to the name of Tom Riddle. And when he stepped onto platform 9 3/4 for the first time, seeing the Hogwarts Express spewing scarlet steam, he did not see the promise of friendship or learning. He saw the first step of his ascent. The castle, rising majestically on the other side of the Black Lake, was not a sanctuary of knowledge, but a kingdom to be conquered. Chapter 2. The air of Slytherin Hogwarts was a marvel of stone and magic. The floating candles of the Great Hall, the enchanted ceiling that mirrored the sky outside, the ghosts that glided through the walls, and the staircases that moved of their own accord. For most first years, it was a place of wonder and discovery. For Tom Riddle, it was a feast for his ambition. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge, not for the love of learning, but for the love of the power it brought. His grades were impeccable, his behavior exemplary. The teachers adored him. He was charming, brilliant, polite, a perfect prefect, a future head boy. It was a mask, and he wore it with mastery.
Behind the captivating smile and the thirst for knowledge, the darkness deepened.
He saw the pure-blood supremacy preached by the other Slytherin students not as an ideology, but as a tool. A way to unite the discontented, the ambitious, those who, like him, craved power. He formed a circle of followers, not friends. They were not his equals, they were his servants, drawn by his charisma and the promise of glory. They were the first embryos of the Death Eaters. But Tom's true goal was not in the classrooms or the bustling corridors. It was in the shadows, in the forbidden texts of the library's restricted section, in the whispered legends about the founders of Hogwarts. It was there that he found himself. The story of Salazar Slytherin, the great wizard who spoke to snakes, who believed in the supremacy of purebloods, and who had left a monster hidden in the school to purge it. The connection was undeniable, electric.
Parseltongue.
The ability to speak to snakes. It was not a quirk, it was a heritage. His search became an obsession. He delved into genealogical records, tracing his maternal lineage back through centuries of wizards.
The name Gaunt. An ancient and fallen pure-blood family, direct descendants of Slytherin.
The shame of his Muggle ancestry, of the name Riddle, burned like acid in his veins, but the blood of Slytherin was his balm. He was not just Tom. He was the heir of Slytherin. The revelation did not humble him, it aggrandized him. It gave him a title, a legacy, a divine purpose. With this new identity, he found what his ancestor had left behind.
The Chamber of Secrets.
The entrance, hidden in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, responded to his sibilant command. Descending that dark tunnel was like entering the heart of his own heritage. The damp walls, the snake carvings, the oppressive silence, it all felt right, like a return to a home he had never known. And then, he saw the colossal statue of Salazar Slytherin and, at its feet, he awakened the
Monster. The Basilisk.
A magnificent and terrifying serpent, with scales of the deepest green and yellow eyes that held death. The creature did not see him as a master, but as an extension of its own will. In its sinuous movements and lethal power, Tom saw a reflection of his own soul. The opening of the Chamber of Secrets was his first great act of terror. The attacks on Muggle-born students, the petrification, the fear that spread through the castle like a plague, it was intoxicating. He was rewriting the history of Hogwarts, fulfilling the legacy of his ancestor. He was the invisible power that made the great Albus Dumbledore seem helpless. It was during this time, drunk on his power and lineage, that he found the final piece of his puzzle. In an old, dusty book about the darkest of arts, he read a word that resonated with the depths of his soul, Horcrux. The concept was terrifying and seductive. To split one's own soul, the most vile and profane act, to anchor it to the earth. To become immortal. Death, for Tom, was the ultimate weakness. The same weakness that had taken his mother, that had left him alone and helpless. Immortality was not just a desire, it was a necessity. It was the only way to ensure he would never be vulnerable again. He needed confirmation. He needed guidance. And he knew exactly who to ask. Professor Horace Slughorn, the potions master, with his love of collecting talented students and his weakness for flattery. One evening, in the warmth of the Slug Club, with the firelight reflecting in goblets of mead, Tom, the perfect student, asked the question. He disguised it as academic curiosity, a theoretical fascination. How exactly does a Horcrux work? Slughorn, flattered by the attention of his brightest student, hesitated. He spoke of the splitting of the soul, of the supreme act of evil, murder, that was necessary to tear the spirit. And then, with a naivety that would haunt him forever, Tom asked the crucial question, the the question that revealed the true scale of his ambition. Wouldn't it be better to have more strength, to split the soul into more parts? For instance, isn't 7 the most powerfully magical number? The horror on Slughorn's face was the only answer Tom needed. The idea was so abominable that the old professor refused to discuss it. But the seed was planted. 7. The most powerfully magical number.
7 soul fragments. 7 anchors to immortality.
7 steps on the path to becoming the greatest wizard of all time. That night, looking at his reflection in the dark window of the Slytherin common room, he no longer saw Tom Riddle, the brilliant orphan. He saw a future forged in dark magic and blood. A future where he would not have a name, but a title. A lord.
Lord Voldemort.
Chapter 3. The Diary and the Basilisk. The first fracture is always the most painful. Before a bone breaks, there is a sound, a nauseating crack that echoes in the silence. Tearing a soul, Tom Riddle would discover, was infinitely worse. There was no sound for the outside world, only a silent scream that threatened to tear him apart from the inside. Immortality demanded a price, and the first payment was about to be made in the stone corridors of Hogwarts. His target was not chosen out of hatred or revenge, but for convenience.
Myrtle Warren.
A whiny, unstable Ravenclaw girl who haunted the second-floor girls' bathroom. She was Muggle-born, which made her, in Tom's distorted view, unworthy of the magic she possessed. Her death would serve a greater purpose, a step on the ladder of his ascension. She was insignificant, a necessary sacrifice on the altar of his ambition. On that fateful day, he followed her. The sound of her sobs echoed on the cold tiles. He felt no pity, only a cold impatience. He entered the bathroom, and his words were not for her, but for the sink with a small carved serpent. The hissing tongue flowed from him, an ancient and powerful sound that did not belong in that mundane space. The stone moved, revealing the darkness of the tunnel leading to the Chamber of Secrets. Myrtle, wiping her eyes, turned at the sound. She saw Tom Riddle's handsome face and, behind him, a pair of large glowing yellow eyes emerging from the darkness. There was no time to scream. The basilisk's gaze was death incarnate. Life left her in an instant, her body falling to the wet floor with a dull thud. For Tom, her death was the trigger.
The supreme act of evil.
The moment Myrtle's life was extinguished, he felt it. A violent rupture within himself. It was a pain unlike any physical pain. It was a spiritual agony, a feeling that his very essence was being torn like parchment. He staggered, cold sweat breaking out on his forehead, nausea rising in his throat. For a terrifying moment, he thought he would disintegrate, that he would become nothing more than dust and echo. But he held on. With the willpower that defined him, he grasped the torn edge of his soul. It was a living, agonizing thing, an open wound in his spirit. He needed a receptacle, a place to contain that pain and that power. He had chosen it carefully. A small, black-covered diary, bought in a Muggle shop in London. It was an anonymous, empty object, waiting to be filled. It was perfect. In a forgotten corner of the dungeons, by the flickering light of a single candle, he performed the ritual. The words were ancient, guttural, a desecration of magic itself. As he spoke them, he felt the fragment of his soul being torn from him, a stream of dark, ethereal smoke bleeding from his chest. He guided it into the diary. The book seemed to absorb it, the blank pages fluttering as if a ghostly wind were passing through them. For an instant, the diary seemed to breathe. The black ink in his inkwell seemed darker, the leather of the cover, colder. He touched it, and a feeling of familiarity and revulsion ran up his arm. It was done. He opened the diary. The pages were as empty as before. But he knew. A part of him now lived there. His memory, his ambition, his 16-year-old soul, preserved forever in ink and paper. It was more than a memory, it was a weapon. A guardian of his legacy. A way to ensure that the heir of Slytherin would never be forgotten, that the Chamber of Secrets could be opened again. To hold that diary was to hold the proof of his triumph. He had cheated death. He had taken the first step toward immortality. The silent scream of his torn soul was replaced by a cold, dark exultation. The cost had been high, the pain excruciating. But as he looked at the innocuous object in his hands, Tom Riddle knew, with absolute certainty, that it had been worth it. He did not feel diminished, but expanded. He now existed in two places at once. It was the beginning of his empire of shadows, and the first stone had been laid with the life of a forgotten girl and a piece of his own soul. That diary was not just a book. It was a testament to his will, an eternal echo of Tom Riddle, the young Dark Lord. Chapter 4. The Gaunts ring. The years after Hogwarts were a blur of exploration and power. Tom Riddle did not seek a position at the Ministry of Magic, to the surprise of all his professors. The bureaucracy of power did not interest him. He wanted power in its purest, most primordial form. He worked briefly at Borgin & Burke's, a dark arts shop in Knockturn Alley. It was not for the money or the prestige, but for the access. The shop was a nexus of cursed artifacts, forbidden histories, and wizards with secrets to sell. It was there that he honed his charm, turning it into a weapon to manipulate the rich and foolish into handing over their treasures. But in his heart, a wound still burned, the shame of his Muggle name, the stain of the father who had abandoned him. His quest for immortality was intertwined with a desire to purify his past, to erase the weakness of his lineage. And that led him on a dark journey to the small, forgotten village of Little Hangleton. The landscape around the village was melancholic, with desolate hills and a sense of decay hanging in the air. The Gaunt shack was even worse. It was barely distinguishable from a pile of ruins, covered in moss and surrounded by an atmosphere of misery and madness. The air was heavy with the smell of dirt and neglect. For Tom, who saw himself as the royalty of the Slytherin line, the sight of that place was an offense. It was the personification of the decay of his magical blood. Inside the shack, he found his uncle, Morphin Gaunt. A broken man, with rotten teeth and crazed eyes, who spoke in hisses, a perversion of the noble language of serpents. Morphin, in his delirium, told Tom the story of his sister, Merope, and the handsome Muggle from the mansion on the hill who had abandoned her. He spoke of how she had dishonored the blood of Slytherin. And he spoke of the ring. The ring. A piece of heavy gold with a black, cracked stone. The stone, Morphin boasted, was the Peveril coat of arms. A name that echoed with power in the oldest legends of the wizarding world. Tom looked at the ring on his uncle's dirty hand and saw more than a family heirloom. He saw a worthy receptacle for another piece of his soul. A symbol of his dual legacy, the blood of Slytherin and, possibly, a connection to the legendary three brothers from the story of Beedle the Bard. The encounter was brief and brutal. Tom stunned his uncle and took the ring. The feel of the cold gold on his skin was like an electric shock. It was his by right. With the ring in his pocket, he crossed the valley to the large house that stood on the hill. The Riddle House. The home of the man who had given him his name and then discarded him. He felt no hesitation, only a cold, rectifying fury. He entered the house not as a lost son, but as a judge and executioner. He found his father, Tom Riddle Sr., and his grandparents. They looked at him with a mixture of confusion and contempt. They did not see a relative in him, but a stranger, an outcast from the local orphanage. In their eyes, Tom saw the reflection of all the abandonment he had suffered. He raised his wand. The green light of the killing curse filled the living room 3 times. 3 bodies fell, their faces frozen in an expression of sudden shock. The act was quick, clinical, and deeply satisfying. It was a purge. By killing the man who had given him life, Tom felt as if he were killing the weak, Muggle part of himself. With the triple murder, the tear in his soul was even more violent than the first. The pain hit him with the force of a hammer, but this time he was prepared. He retreated to the decrepit Gaunt shack, the scene of his family humiliation, and decided to make it the site of his rebirth. He took the Peveril ring. The black stone seemed to pulse in his hand. He performed the Horcrux enchantment once more. The fragment of his soul, torn by parricide, flowed like liquid poison into the ring. The gold seemed to darken, and the stone, once merely cracked, seemed to absorb all the light around it. The Horcrux was made. He did not stop there. With an expertise in magic that already surpassed that of many experienced wizards, he altered Morphin's memories. He implanted the confession of the triple murder into his uncle's already fractured mind. When Morphin was dragged off to Azkaban, proclaiming his innocence in hisses that no one understood, Tom Riddle felt nothing. He had erased his past, stolen his future, and turned his family's heritage into an instrument of his immortality. He put the ring on his finger. The cold of the cursed metal seemed to fuse with his skin. He was no longer just the heir of Slytherin. He was the Lord of Death, the master of his own destiny. With 2 parts of his soul securely anchored to the earth, he felt more powerful than ever. But he also felt a new kind of emptiness, a growing coldness in his heart that not even the thrill of power could completely warm. Humanity was draining from him, drop by drop, with every soul he tore. And he could hardly wait to tear the next one. Chapter 5, Relics and Ambitions. The creation of 2 Horcruxes did not quench Tom Riddle's thirst, it only deepened it. He now saw himself less as a man and more as a monument under construction, and each Horcrux was a cornerstone of his eternity. His ambition, once focused on himself, now expanded to embrace history. He did not want to use just any objects. He desired the greatest treasures of the wizarding world, the objects that belonged to the founders of Hogwarts themselves. To anchor his soul to such relics would not only be an act of self-preservation, but a declaration of supremacy. He would become the heir not only of Slytherin, but of the entire legacy of Hogwarts. His work at Borgin and Berks proved to be the perfect hunting ground. It was there that he heard the whispers about Hepzibah Smith, an elderly and immensely wealthy witch, a distant descendant of Helga Hufflepuff herself. It was said that she possessed 2 treasures of incalculable value, the small golden cup of her ancestor and, more incredibly, Salazar Slytherin's locket, which she had bought from a desperate seller, none other than Tom's mother, Merope Gaunt. The irony was delicious. The last treasure of his maternal lineage, sold for a pittance to survive, was now in the hands of a foolish old woman. It was an insult he needed to correct. Tom Riddle, now presenting himself as a charming young expert in antiques, began to visit Hepzibah Smith. He wrapped her in his web of flattery and false admiration. He praised her taste, her collection, her supposed insight. Hepzibah, lonely and vain, was completely enchanted. She saw him as a brilliant young man who finally appreciated her true worth. During one of his visits, with the air in the room stuffy with the scent of flowers and dust, Hepzibah, eager to impress him, decided to show him her greatest treasures. With hands trembling with excitement, she summoned her house elf, Hokey, who brought an ornate box. First, she revealed Helga Hufflepuff's cup. It was small, made of solid gold, with 2 finely crafted handles and an engraved badger. It was simple, but it radiated a sense of good, honest magic. Tom held it, and his fingers tingled. He felt the ancient power within it. He coveted it instantly. Then, with even more ceremony, she opened a second box. Inside, on a bed of satin, lay Slytherin's locket. It was heavy, made of gold, with Slytherin's mark, an S-shaped serpent, studded with brilliant green stones. The moment Tom touched it, he felt a resonance, a recognition. The blood of Slytherin in his veins sang in response to the touch of his ancestor's locket. It was like recovering a lost limb. His face, however, remained a mask of professional admiration. He praised the objects, her luck in possessing them. But inside, a cold, unchangeable decision had been made. Those objects would be his. He returned 2 days later. This time, he brought not flattery, but a subtle, undetectable poison, mixed into Hepzibah's nightly cocoa. Her death was quiet and recorded as an accident of old age. It was easy, almost trivial. He felt nothing for the woman, only the contempt he felt for all who were easily deceived. Once again, he used his mastery of memory charms. He invaded the mind of the poor house elf, Hokey, and planted a new memory, that she, by mistake, had poisoned her mistress. The elf's confession was immediate and convincing. The Ministry of Magic closed the case with lazy efficiency.
Witte ziba sedet, tomesse soltore for the third time.
The pain was less shocking, more familiar, like the echo of an old injury. He took Hufflepuff's cup and Slytherin's locket and disappeared from the lives of everyone who knew him at Borgin and Berks. He no longer needed that facade. In a secret hiding place, surrounded by books of dark magic, he performed the profane rituals. First, with the locket. He poured the fragment of his soul into the heavy gold, feeling the ancient magic of the object writhe and corrupt under his influence. The emerald serpent seemed to blink with a new, malevolent light. The locket of his ancestor now contained a piece of his immortal heir. It became his third Horcrux. Then, the cup. The murder of a random Muggle wanderer, a random and senseless crime, was enough to tear his soul for the fourth time. The internal scream was now a constant hum in the back of his mind. He took the golden cup, a symbol of loyalty and hard work, and desecrated it with a fragment of his soul born from a lazy murder. The cup, once warm to the touch with Hufflepuff's magic, became cold, its golden sheen seeming superficial, hiding an inner darkness. The fourth Horcrux was complete. He now had 4 pieces of his soul anchored to the earth, and he himself felt less and less human. His appearance had begun to change subtly. His skin was paler, his face more elongated, almost waxy. His eyes seemed to hold a reddish glint in moments of anger. The fractures in his soul were manifesting in his physical body. He was becoming a creature shaped by his own dark magic. He did not care. Humanity was a weakness he was happy to discard. Each Horcrux took him further away from the orphan boy named Tom Riddle and brought him closer to the eternal entity he aspired to be, Lord Voldemort. With the Founder's treasures in his possession, he felt that his right to rule was being engraved on the very fabric of magical history. And he was not done yet. Chapter 6. The Locket and the Cave. With 4 fragments of his soul securely guarded, Lord Voldemort did not feel security, but a growing paranoia. Immortality was a castle he was building, and each Horcrux was a tower. But a tower could be toppled if it were found. He needed fortresses, impenetrable places, guarded not only by magic, but by despair itself. His mind returned to a childhood memory, a memory stained with gray and salt. The annual outings of Wool's orphanage. Forced trips to a rocky, desolate coast, where the biting wind and gray waves were the only entertainment. The other children tried to play, but Tom wandered off. He explored the cliffs, the loneliness of the place mirroring his own. It was during one of these explorations that he found the cave. It was a dark fissure in the cliff face, accessible only at low tide. The air inside was icy and smelled of decay and brine. It was a place of primordial fear. And that was exactly why he chose it. He, as a boy, had terrified 2 other children from the orphanage within that darkness, using his nascent magic to give them a taste of true dread. Now, as Lord Voldemort, he would transform that playground of childish cruelty into a cathedral for his immortal soul. He would take a place of trauma and turn it into a monument to his power. He returned to that coast, not as a thin, angry boy, but as a rising dark lord. The cave was as he remembered it, dark, foreboding, and forgotten by the world. It was perfect. He decided that he would hide the Horcrux he valued most there, the locket of his ancestor, Salazar Slytherin. The preparation of the cave was a masterpiece of dark magic and calculated cruelty. The first defense was the entrance itself, sealed by a rock that would only yield to a blood sacrifice. A portal that required pain to be opened. Inside, the true ingenuity of his evil was revealed. The cave opened into a vast black underground lake, its water as still and silent as obsidian glass. The quiet was deceptive. Voldemort filled that lake with a legion of inferi, reanimated corpses, drowned in its depths, waiting silently for anyone who dared to touch the water. They were the perfect guardians, tireless, fearless, and driven by an endless hunger for warmth and life. In the center of the lake, there was a small crystal island, and upon it, a stone basin. Inside the basin, he poured the potion of despair. A vile, emerald-colored mixture that could not be emptied by magic or overflowed. It could only be drunk. And to drink that potion was to invite the worst memories, the worst fears, the deepest pain and regret to flood the mind, leaving the victim incapacitated and vulnerable, consumed by their own anguish. At the bottom of the basin, under the poisonous liquid, he placed Slytherin's locket. To reach his soul, an intruder would have to offer themselves as a sacrifice, give up their own willpower, and then face an army of the dead. It was a fortress of psychological pain and physical horror. The act of placing the locket inside was a ritual in itself. He sailed to the island in a small enchanted boat, the silence of the cave broken only by the dripping of water and the sound of his own breath. He felt the power emanating from his defenses, the darkness of that place responding to the darkness within him. He felt at home. That place, the seaside cave, represented the essence of Lord Voldemort. It took the weakness of childhood and transformed it into strength. It used the fear of death to create immortal guardians. It demanded the destruction of an enemy's spirit before they could even touch a fraction of his. It was arrogant, impenetrable, and utterly inhuman. He had created a personal hell to protect a piece of his inner hell. As he left the cave, sealing the entrance with his own blood, he felt a dark satisfaction. Let Dumbledore, with his love and his light, try to find it. The darkness of that soul was a bottomless abyss, a reminder of how deep evil can plunge. And speaking of plunging, let's take a short break from this dark journey. If this story has you hooked, know that there is much more to come. Help me reach my goal of 1,000 subscribers. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss any magical adventures. And in the comments, tell me, what cities are you watching from?
Now, back to the shadows. Chapter 7. The Lost Diadem of Ravenclaw. Lord Voldemort's ambition knew no bounds.
Possessing relics of Hufflepuff and Slytherin was an achievement, but his pride demanded more. He wanted an item from each founder. Gryffindor's sword, he knew, was safe with Dumbledore, out of his reach for now. But there was another legend, a ghostly whisper that persisted in the corridors of Hogwarts, the lost diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw, an object said to enhance the wisdom of its wearer. Voldemort did not seek wisdom, but the symbolic power of the diadem. He saw Ravenclaw's intelligence as a form of power, and possessing her diadem would be another step toward mastering all aspects of the Hogwarts legacy. The problem was that the diadem had been lost for centuries. No one knew its whereabouts. But Voldemort was a master at extracting secrets, from both the living and the dead. His target became the Grey Lady, the ghost of Ravenclaw Tower. He watched her for a while, noticing her silent melancholy and her
detachment.
With his unparalleled ability to read people, or, in this case, ghosts, he sensed an ancient pain in her, an untold story. He knew, through his research, that the Grey Lady in life had been Helena Ravenclaw, Rowena's own daughter. He approached her not with threats, but with the same manipulative seduction he had used on Hepzibah Smith. He feigned empathy. He spoke of great ambitions, of understanding legacies, of feeling the weight of history. He presented himself as someone who understood her burden, who saw beyond the grey spectre and saw the woman she had once been. He made her feel seen, perhaps for the first time in centuries. Helena, marked by betrayal in life and haunted by it in death, was vulnerable to his charm. She had stolen the diadem from her mother, envious of her wisdom and attention. In an act of desperation and regret, she had hidden it in the hollow of a tree in a distant forest in Albania, before being killed by the Bloody Baron. Voldemort listened to her story with predatory patience. He flattered her, saying he understood her desire to surpass such a famous mother. He validated her pain, and in return, she gave him her secret. She confessed the exact location where the diadem was hidden. The moment the words left her spectral mouth, Voldemort's charm vanished, replaced by a cold triumph. He left her with her eternal remorse, now magnified by the realization that she had been deceived once more. The journey to Albania was trivial. The forest was ancient and dark, but for Voldemort, it was just another setting. He found the hollow tree exactly as Helena had described. And inside, wrapped in rotting rags, was the diadem. It was delicate, made of silver, shaped like an eagle and engraved with the famous words, "Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure." The irony of the inscription was not lost on him. He was about to use this symbol of boundless wisdom to house a fragment of his deliberately limited and broken soul. He needed another death to create the fifth Horcrux. An Albanian peasant, a man whose name history would never record, crossed his path at the wrong moment.
A flash of green light, and Voldemort's soul split once more.
The process was now routine, the pain, an old acquaintance. With the diadem in hand and his newly torn soul, he returned to the one place he considered his true home and his greatest enemy, Hogwarts. He needed to hide the diadem, and what place would be safer and more arrogantly perfect than Dumbledore's own castle? He entered the school secretly, under the pretext of a visit, asking Dumbledore for a position as defense against the dark arts teacher. It was a game. He knew Dumbledore would refuse. The true purpose of his visit was to access the school. During his stay, he snuck up to the 7th floor. He knew the castle's secrets better than anyone. He knew about the Room of Requirement. He thought of what he needed, a place to hide something. The smooth wall transformed into a door. Upon entering, he found himself in a cathedral of lost objects, a vast repository of secrets and forgotten things from generations of Hogwarts students. It was the perfect hiding place. A place where everything was hidden in plain sight. He walked through the labyrinth of junk until he found a stone bust of an ugly wizard. There, he performed the final ritual. The fragment of his soul flowed into the diadem, corrupting the silver, staining Ravenclaw's magic with his own darkness. He placed the diadem on the bust's head and covered it with an old wig and some dust to disguise it. It was done. His fifth Horcrux, a symbol of the brightest mind in Hogwarts, was now hidden in the heart of the castle, guarded by the very indifference of time and forgetfulness. It was the height of arrogance, hiding a piece of his soul under the nose of his greatest adversary. As he left the room of requirement, letting the door disappear behind him, Lord Voldemort smiled. He was weaving his immortality into the very tapestry of the magical world, and no one, not even the great Albus Dumbledore, could see the threads. Chapter 8. The Cup and the Vault. With 5 Horcruxes created, Voldemort reached a new level of power and paranoia. He existed in so many places that he began to fear losing control. To guard all the fragments of his soul personally was a risk. He needed a safe place, a loyal guardian. The idea of entrusting a piece of his immortality to someone else was repugnant to his egocentric nature, but logic dictated the necessity. It would not be an act of trust, but of delegation. He would not give a gift, but a sacred burden. The choice of guardian was obvious.
Bellatrix Lestrange.
None of his followers were so devoted, so fanatically loyal. She did not worship him as a leader, but as a god. Her madness was her greatest strength. She would commit any atrocity, endure any pain in his name. In her, Voldemort saw the distorted reflection of his own passion for power, a devotion that bordered on self-destruction. He despised her for this weakness, but he also knew he could exploit it. He summoned her to his hiding place. The air crackled with his presence, more reptilian than human now. He presented her with Helga Hufflepuff's cup. The gold shone in the dim light, but it radiated a coldness that belied its appearance. He explained the nature of the object, not in detail, for he trusted no one with the full secret of the Horcruxes, but enough for her to understand its priceless value. "It is the key to my immortality," he hissed, his red eyes fixed on hers. "Guard it with your life, for it is more valuable than yours." Bellatrix fell to her knees, trembling with ecstasy and terror. To be chosen for such an honor was the greatest validation of her existence. She swore to protect it, to die for it, to kill for it. Voldemort dismissed her with a wave, watching her leave with cold satisfaction. He had not entrusted her with a secret. He had chained her to his will with a cursed golden link. Bellatrix, for her part, knew that no place in her home would be safe enough. She needed the most impenetrable vault in the wizarding world. She needed Gringotts. The Goblin Bank, with its imposing white marble facade, was a fortress. The deepest chambers were guarded not only by complex spells and massive doors, but by magical creatures and ancient curses. The Lestrange family vault was one of the oldest and best protected. The journey to the depths of Gringotts was a descent into darkness and danger. The mining cart sped down the tracks at a dizzying speed, plunging into a labyrinth of tunnels that defied logic and gravity.
Der grew colder, thinner.
Finally, they arrived. The door to the Lestrange vault was of a dark, polished metal, with no visible lock. A goblin touched it with a long finger, and the metal dissolved like smoke, revealing the entrance. Inside, the vault was a cavern of treasures piled without order. Mountains of galleons, sickles and nuts, silver armor, jewels that shone with an inner light, and dark artifacts that whispered in the silence. But Bellatrix added her own defenses that only a mind as sadistic as hers could conceive. She placed the Gemino curse and the Flagranti curse on all the treasure. Anyone who touched any object would cause it to multiply instantly, creating burning copies that would scorch the skin on contact. A thief would be quickly crushed and burned under the weight of their own greed. And in the heart of that protected chaos, on a high shelf, she placed Hufflepuff's cup. It looked like a simple object amidst so much opulence, but it was the soul of the vault, the true treasure. For final protection, Gringotts had positioned a guardian in the deepest chambers, a dragon. A Ukrainian iron belly, blind and tortured, chained to the stone, its roar of pain a warning to all who approached. The beast was a final deterrent, a wall of fire and fury. Voldemort was pleased with the arrangement. The cup, his fourth Horcrux, was now buried under layers of security. Bellatrix's madness, the goblin's greed, curses of duplication and fire, and the fury of a dragon. It seemed impregnable. The irony of using a symbol of loyalty and justice, Hufflepuff's cup, and giving it to his most disloyal and unjust follower, to be guarded in a place of pure greed, was a testament to his contempt for everything the Founders represented. He had taken their symbols and twisted them into monuments to his own dark glory. And with the cup safe in the bowels of the earth, he turned to the creation of his next, and most alive, Horcrux. Chapter 9. The Snake and the Servant Lord Voldemort was approaching his goal. 6 Horcruxes created, 6 guarantees against mortality. The magical number 7 called to him. He needed one more receptacle, but he wanted this one to be different. The diary was a weapon of memory. The ring, the cup, the locket, and the diadem were static objects, silent guardians.
He wanted something alive.
Something that could move, defend itself, and always be near him. A Horcrux that was both guardian and companion. His choice fell on Nagini, the great snake that had become his constant companion in the years of exile and rebirth. The connection between them was deep, transcending that of master and pet. As a parcel-mouth, he conversed with her. In her lidless eyes and sinuous silence, he found a reflection of his own nature, lethal, patient, and misunderstood by the world. She was a living link to his ancestor, Salazar Slytherin. To turn her into a Horcrux would be the final act of merging with his legacy. The idea was a perversion of nature on a level he had not yet explored. To enclose a fragment of a human soul in a non-human creature was a magic so dark that few would dare to contemplate it. But for Voldemort, limits existed only to be surpassed. The opportunity for the necessary murder arose during his search for information about Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix. He captured Bertha Jorkins, a Ministry of Magic employee who, by sheer bad luck, had discovered information about Barty Crouch Jr., one of Voldemort's Death Eaters thought to be dead. Bertha's mind was a vault of secrets, and Voldemort broke it with merciless brutality. Under torture, she not only revealed the information about Crouch, but also about an event being planned at Hogwarts, the Triwizard Tournament. An idea began to form in Voldemort's mind, a complex plan for his return. When he had extracted everything he needed from Bertha Jorkins, she was no longer useful. Her mind was permanently damaged, her body broken. Her death would be the sacrifice for his final Horcrux. With Nagini by his side, hissing softly in the darkness, he raised his wand. The killing curse struck Bertha, and her life was extinguished. In that instant, the 6th fracture occurred in Voldemort's soul. It was now a devastatingly familiar process.
The tear, the pain, the emptiness.
But this time, the feeling was different. The remaining soul within his body was so thin, so stretched, that it barely seemed human. It was a tatter, an echo of who he had once been. He turned to Nagini. The ritual to transfer the soul fragment to a living creature was complex and abominable. It involved not only enchantments, but an exchange, a fusion of wills. He looked into the snake's eyes, and she looked back, without fear. She sensed her master's essence, the part of him that had always understood her. He performed the enchantment. The soul fragment, dark and twisted, left his body and flowed into Nagini. The great snake writhed, not in pain, but in transformation.
For a moment, her eyes shone with a malevolent, human intelligence.
Her connection with Voldemort solidified, becoming something deeper than Parseltongue. She was now a literal extension of him. She could share his thoughts, feel his emotions. He could, at times, possess her body, see through her eyes. The 6th Horcrux was complete.
Nagini.
A living weapon, a walking secret, a piece of his soul that could hunt and kill at his command. It was the pinnacle of his arrogance. With the creation of this Horcrux, Voldemort felt he had achieved immortality. 7 parts of a soul, himself, the diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, and Nagini. The magical number was complete. He was eternal. He was invincible. It was this belief, this supreme arrogance, that blinded him to the danger that was to come. He had heard fragments of a prophecy that spoke of someone with the power to defeat him. Born at the end of July, to parents who had thrice defied him. He did not see the prophecy as an existential threat, but as an obstacle to be eliminated. He, the immortal Lord, would not be challenged by a child. He would go to Godric's Hollow to crush this threat before it could flourish. He would kill Harry Potter. and in his quest to solidify his immortality, he would make the mistake that would lead to his own ruin, creating, unknowingly, his final and most dangerous Horcrux. Chapter 10. The lightning-shaped scar. The night of October 31st arrived in Godric's Hollow with a chill that was not just from the autumn. It was a cold that clung to the soul. For most of the wizarding world, it was Halloween, a night of celebration. For Lord Voldemort, it was a night of consolidation. The prophecy was a loose end, an annoying buzz of possibility in his symphony of absolute power. He did not believe in fate, he believed in his own will. And his will was that the Potter child should not live. The family's location had been betrayed by Peter Pettigrew. Trust, friendship, for Voldemort, these were just weaknesses to be exploited. He walked down the street of the small village, the hood of his dark cloak obscuring his serpentine face. The costumed muggles who passed him did not see him, protected by concealment charms and their own blissful ignorance. He felt like a god walking among insects. The Potter's house was modest, with warm lights shining in the windows. A scene of domestic happiness that disgusted him. He did not knock. With a lazy flick of his wand, the front door was torn from its hinges. James Potter appeared in the hallway, his face a mask of shock and defiance. He was without a wand.
Lily, take Harry and go.
It's him. Run. I'll hold him off.
Voldemort laughed. Aye, mirthless sound.
Hold him off. James's bravery was foolish, pathetic.
Avada Kedavra.
The flash of green light filled the hallway. James Potter's body fell to the floor with the finality of a puppet whose strings had been cut. An obstacle removed. He went up the stairs, each step slow and deliberate. He could hear Lily Potter's sobs in the baby's room. He could hear the child's cry. He entered the room. Lily stood in front of the crib, her arms outstretched as if she could stop death with her own body. "Not Harry, not Harry, please not Harry," she begged, tears streaming down her face.
Stand aside, you silly girl, stand aside now, Voldemort said.
He had no intention of killing her. She was a pure-blood witch, albeit of deplorable tastes. Her death was unnecessary. "Not Harry, please no, take me, kill me instead." Her plea irritated him.
Sacrifice. Love.
Useless concepts. He had given her a choice. She had rejected it.
This is my last warning.
"Not Harry. Please, have mercy, have mercy."
Voldemort's patience ran out.
He did not understand, nor did he care to understand, the force that was at play. He only saw a woman standing in his way. With another flash of green light, Lily Potter joined her husband in death. Now, nothing stood between him and the boy. He looked into the crib. Harry Potter looked back, his green eyes, the same as his mother's, fixed on Voldemort's red, slitted eyes. He was no longer crying. There was only a childlike curiosity in his gaze.
Voldemort raised his wand for the third time.
He felt the exultation of supreme power. This was the end of the prophecy. This was the triumph of his will over fate.
Avada Kedavra.
The green curse shot from his wand, but something extraordinary happened. The moment the curse struck the child, it rebounded. The magic of Lily's sacrifice, a love so pure and powerful that Voldemort could not conceive, formed an impenetrable shield around her son. The killing curse, the force he commanded so easily, turned against its master. The pain was absolute, annihilating. The curse hit him, and his body, made unstable and inhuman by the multiple fractures in his soul, was completely destroyed.
Disintegrated.
But he did not die. His Horcruxes anchored him to life. He was less than a ghost, a shadow of a spirit, a thing of pure pain and consciousness, forced to flee. In the chaos of that moment, with the curse rebounding and his body dissolving, the unthinkable happened. His soul, already so mutilated and unstable, split once more. It was a violent, directionless fragment, torn from him not by a deliberate ritual, but by the force of his own magic being turned against him. That piece of soul, desperate for a receptacle, flew across the room and clung to the only living thing that remained.
The boy in the crib.
The fragment of Lord Voldemort's soul entered Harry Potter, lodging itself in him, burning a lightning-shaped scar on his forehead as a mark of its profane presence. Voldemort, in his spectral form, did not realize what he had done. He only knew his pain, his defeat, his humiliation. He fled into the night, a whisper of terror, leaving behind a ruined house, 2 bodies, and a crying baby. He had unintentionally created his 7th Horcrux. He had marked his fated enemy as his equal. He had turned the boy he was supposed to kill into the container for a part of his own immortality. In his attempt to annihilate the prophecy, he had set it in motion, forging the very weapon that would one day destroy him. The scar on Harry Potter's forehead was not just a reminder of an attack, it was the invisible link, the accidental Horcrux, Lord Voldemort's greatest secret and greatest mistake. Chapter 11. The Hunt and the Destruction. For 13 years, Lord Voldemort was less than a shadow, a spirit that clung to life by possessing the bodies of animals, mostly snakes, in the forests of Albania. Every moment was an agony, a weak and humiliating existence. His Horcruxes kept him alive, but he was powerless. Meanwhile, the wizarding world celebrated his downfall, and the child who had defeated him grew up, oblivious to the piece of dark soul he carried within him. His return was slow and painful, culminating in his resurrection in the little Hangleton graveyard. With a restored body, he felt his Horcruxes as distant points of light in his consciousness, anchors that guaranteed his existence. He was whole again, more powerful than ever. Or so he thought. The destruction began subtly. The diary. The memory of his 16-year-old self, unleashed on the world by Lucius Malfoy, was the first to fall. In the heart of the Chamber of Secrets, Harry Potter, a 12-year-old boy, faced the ghost of Tom Riddle and the basilisk. With the monster's fang, soaked in deadly poison, Harry stabbed the book. For Voldemort, hundreds of miles away, the sensation was of a sharp, inexplicable shock. A stab of cold pain in his chest, followed by a sense of loss, as if a phantom limb had been amputated. He did not understand what it was, but he felt his life force diminish, if only slightly. The first tower of his immortal castle had crumbled in silence. Years passed. Dumbledore, having discovered the secret of the Horcruxes, began the hunt. Amidst the ruins of the Gaunt Shack, he found the Peveril ring. Recognizing the stone as the Resurrection Stone, he committed a moment of weakness, putting it on his finger, and was struck by the deadly curse that protected it. But before the curse consumed him, he destroyed the Horcrux inside the ring with Gryffindor's sword, imbued with basilisk venom. This time, the sensation for Voldemort was stronger.
A wave of nausea and fury.
Another part of himself, erased. He began to feel fear, an emotion he thought he had transcended. His soul was being hunted. The hunt continued after Dumbledore's death, now led by Harry, Ron, and Hermione. In the seaside cave, they faced the Potion of Despair and the Inferi, only to discover that the real locket had already been taken by Regulus Black. The search led them to the Ministry of Magic, now under Voldemort's control, and from the hands of Dolores Umbridge. The locket, hanging around Ron's neck, was a poison to the spirit. When they finally opened it with Ron's Parseltongue, the essence of Voldemort's soul emerged, a shadow that fed on their insecurities. But the blade of Gryffindor's sword came down, and with one blow, the locket was destroyed.
Voldemort felt it.
A scream of rage echoed in his mind. The loss was palpable, a part of his essence torn from him. The anger was so intense it shook the mansion where he was.
3 Horcruxes gone.
His immortality was unraveling. Fear gave way to fury and verification. He thought of his other hiding places. The cup.
In Gringotts.
He felt a pang of panic. The mental connection with Harry Potter, the scar, the accidental Horcrux, became a two-way street. Harry saw into his mind. The cup. The diadem at Hogwarts. They went to Gringotts. The chaos that followed, the escape on the back of a dragon, was confirmation of his worst fears. The cup had been stolen. And then, Hermione destroyed it in the Chamber of Secrets with another basilisk fang.
Another blow.
The pain in his soul was now an open, throbbing wound. He could barely think straight, his fury clouding his judgment. He rushed to the last hiding place he knew.
Hogwarts.
The Battle of Hogwarts began, a siege of fire and darkness against the light. He still believed the diadem was safe. But Harry, guided by the Grey Lady and his own intuition, found it in the Room of Requirement. In the midst of the chaos of fiendfire, the diadem was consumed, the soul of Voldemort within it screaming in silent agony as it was purified by the cursed flames. 5 Horcruxes destroyed. Most of his soul had been obliterated. He felt a fragility he had not known since childhood. He was mortal, vulnerable. His only remaining Horcrux, he thought, was Nagini. He kept her close, protected in a bubble of magic.
And then, the final confrontation in the Forbidden Forest.
Harry Potter gave himself up.
Voldemort, triumphant, cast the killing curse.
But he did not kill Harry. He killed the part of his own soul that lived inside Harry.
The accidental Horcrux. The seventh part.
With this act, he destroyed his own link to life, healing his enemy's soul. Voldemort did not understand. He believed Harry was dead. He marched to the castle for his final
victory.
But Harry survived. And in the final battle, in the Great Hall, only one Horcrux remained.
As Voldemort duelled with Harry, the serpent Nagini attacked.
But from the Sorting Hat, Neville Longbottom pulled Gryffindor's sword and, with a heroic blow, beheaded the Great Snake. The last fragment of Voldemort's soul on Earth was extinguished. In that moment, all his anchors were gone. All that remained was the last fragile piece of soul in his monstrous body. He was, for the first time in decades, completely mortal. Chapter 12. The Legacy of the Seven Souls. The Great Hall of Hogwarts was in ruins.
The dust of battle danced in the sunbeams that streamed through the broken windows, illuminating the living and the dead.
At the center of it all, two wizards circled each other, the focal point of a century of conflict.
Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort.
But this was no longer the feared Dark Lord, the Immortal. It was just Tom Riddle.
All the power, all the dark magic, could not hide the truth.
Without his Horcruxes, he was a man mutilated in body and soul, but a man nonetheless. Fear, the emotion he so despised and used as a weapon, was now his. The smell of his own mortality filled his nostrils. He looked at Harry, the boy who had survived, and saw the personification of all his failures. He saw the power of love that he could never comprehend. He saw the loyalty of friends he never had. He saw the courage of a sacrifice he would never make. The Elder Wand, the deathly hallow he had stolen from Dumbledore's tomb, felt strange in his hand, disloyal. He did not understand its true mastery. Power came not from killing, but from conquering death, and he, in his fear, had only embraced it.
Expelliarmus, shouted Harry. Avada Kedavra, screamed Voldemort.
The two spells met in mid-air, a beam of red light against a beam of green light. But the Elder Wand would not kill its true master. And its true master was Harry Potter. Voldemort's spell rebounded once more, just as it had that night in Godric's Hollow. This time, there were no Horcruxes to save him. There were no anchors to bind his mutilated soul to the earth. The flash of green light hit him, and the last pathetic fragment of Tom Marvolo Riddle's soul was torn from his body. There was no spectacular death. There was no final cry of defiance. His body simply fell backward, empty and lifeless. A human shell that had long ago lost its humanity. The great Lord Voldemort died like a man, and his body remained, proof of his final mortality. The story of Lord Voldemort and his Horcruxes is a tragedy born of arrogance and fear. In his quest to cheat death, he destroyed himself. He tore his soul to pieces, and in doing so, lost everything that made him human, the ability to love, to feel empathy, to create instead of destroy. His legacy was not of eternal power, but of pain. The scars he left on the wizarding world and in the hearts of those who fought him were deep. But scars are also a sign of healing. They remind us that pain can be overcome, that wounds can close. Tom Riddle's story teaches us that true immortality is not found in living forever, but in the legacy we leave behind. Not in the things we accumulate or the power we conquer, but in the hearts we touch and the love we share. A whole soul, even in a short life, is infinitely more powerful and valuable than a soul torn into 7 pieces to last an empty eternity. The greatest magic of all is not to defy death, but to embrace life, with all its joys, sorrows, and most importantly, with all its love. This journey through the shadows has come to an end. I hope you have felt every moment of this dark and powerful story. The universe of Harry Potter is vast and full of lessons, and this is one of the most profound. Thank you so much for joining me. Help me reach my goal of 1,000 subscribers. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss any magical adventures. And, of course, in the comments, tell me, what cities are you watching from? Until the next story.